being here. It's wonderful to see you all. We are incredibly fortunate today to have with us Shinmon Michael Newton, one of the uh, senior teachers at Mountain Rain Zen in Vancouver, British Columbia, and one of the branching streams in, in the practices with Norman Fisher, who many of you know. And I know him only through Zoom. He often supports the work of Seattle Soto Zen, which is where he was this morning and yesterday. And I'm incredibly grateful he agreed to be here. His partner at Mountain Rain, Kate, was here just recently, and I'm going to go ahead and thank him deeply for being here. And maybe you could flesh out the introduction if you'd like a little bit. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say I'm so pleased and indeed honored to be here, to be asked to talk with you and share the Dharma in a little way I can. First of all, just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Good. So thank you, Jindo Steve, for that warm and welcome. Yeah, maybe I'll flesh out just a little bit. I first started to get interested in Asia, Japan, way back when I was like 14 years old. I'm now in my 70s, so it was a few years ago. And I was doing Aikido, martial arts. And eventually, when I was 19, that's what drew me to Japan. I lived for a year with my Aikido teacher, studying in a town called Kanazawa. And it was there that I fell in love with the Japanese aesthetics, which very soon led me to Zen practice. There's something about beauty, that simple beauty, and Zen that I think really go together. We emphasize, of course, suffering and working with suffering, but there is also the deep appreciation and indeed, I think, embodiment of beauty that is also so much of our practice as well. So I won't talk too much about anymore about Japan, except to say I went back. I got my undergrad degree in Japanese language and literature. I went to Japan and did my graduate work in Japanese religions, mostly new religions. And that's really where I started my Zen practice. Kate and I became a couple in Japan. We were both graduate students then. And we moved to Kyoto, where we practiced together with Shohaku Okumura. It's a name I think some of you are probably familiar with his books and things. And so we practiced with him in that kind of antaiji style of every month a sesshin, 5-day sesshin, where it's basically nothing but sitting and eating. No Dharma talks, no interviews, no doksan, very minimal service. So that was my introduction to Zen. And then when Kate and I came back in Vancouver, that's where we connected with Norman. He was coming up. So gets Norman Fisher. And somehow I ended up, both Kate and I ended up ordaining with him and practicing with him for many, many years. Deep appreciation of him, and also all the other teachers that I've connected with, like Jan Chosen Bays and other teachers as well. And then professionally, I taught at university for quite a few years, mostly Asian religions, introduction to religious studies, and things like that. So that's kind of my area. As Steve mentioned, I'm actually right now in Bellingham on my way home, and I'm staying over with a friend here because we just finished opening the practice period for the Seattle group, and very delightful to meet those people again and to help out. All went very well. And this kind of connects to what I wanted to talk about. Um, Given what's going on in the world right now, the animosity, the divisiveness that we see, um, I think perhaps what's one of the most important things we can do right now is to nurture relationship, nurture connection. Um, so, in some way, I kind of think of like Zen in the North, reaching out, connecting with Zen in the South, um, is in this little excursion that Kate and I are on. So many people, and I'm sure this has happened to you too, have spoken to me um, about how to live in this world at this time. How do we really meet this moment when there is an almost what seems impossible way of reaching across the divide to the other side? And I don't know really what will be the best way to reach uh, to the other side. I don't really know what will be the best way to cultivate a deep listening, encourage people to listen to each other. In our own Sangha, for example, we have right now kind of struggle, not exactly a struggle, but a lack of communication between uh, a number of young people who identify as trans and a couple of older members, particularly, who find it quite challenging to understand uh, what trans really means, and they feel kind of threatened by it. Um, so I think what's important, of course, to acknowledge this kind of mm, this place where we are at this moment in time together, and then to cultivate, return to the early teachings, I think, of the Buddha that so emphasized Kalyana Mitra, the kind of spiritual friendship that the Buddha spoke so highly of. When we look at the early suttas, the early scriptures, the Buddha thought of the Sangha as kind of a harmonious group of spiritual friends looking out for each other's welfare and living together and basically in equality um, for the benefit or in order to support each other's spiritual development. Now, I must admit, when I started my Zen practice in Japan, um, that understanding of Sangha uh, and that understanding of practicing together was not in my mind at all. I was struggling with my life in various ways, relationships, who am I, what am I going to do with this life, the kind of things that I think any person in their 20s and 30s kind of has to grapple with. But I saw my suffering, as my personal suffering. And because it's personal, then my understanding was, well, I have to fix it. I will fix my own suffering somehow. And I suspect that's kind of the common message of our culture, right? Fix yourself, take a class, buy the right Dharma book, go to the self-help book. There's all these ways that we supposedly are supposed to fix ourselves. Kind of like, I think maybe it's a carryover from our cowboy culture view, right? Tough person and taking care of myself one way or another. So the general message, I think, was, and maybe still is, I can solve my problems if I just have the correct knowledge, if I have enough time, if I buy the right products now, right? Or if I, of course, have plenty of money. I'll need that too to kind of really fix myself. So that's where I was. And I think that's also the case with many people today. Now, when I meet the people in our Sangha, I notice that this same view is often transferred to our practice, sitting on the cushion. Uh, and that view about practice that I hear about from our Sangha members goes something like this. With enough diligence, making my own effort at practice, my own willpower, my own intelligence, I'll lick this nagging problem of my life. I just need to do it more, learn how to do it, and then I'll be okay. So that kind of cowboy view, okay, once I learn what to do, I'll go to my room, I'll go to my local cave, devote myself to meditation until the big light goes on, and then everything will be well. My life will be swell, and I'll be able to go on. But we all know, and many of you I know are very mature practitioners, that this view of practice is really skewed. It is simply the kind of delusion that our society is, and we're applying it to ourselves, to our own spiritual practice, thinking we'll find a way. So I often, when I'm giving talks, I bring up with the young people that come the Meghiya Sutta, which is an early Buddhist text that has a very interesting story. And it's about this young monk, Meghiya, who wants to practice meditation. And he's with the Buddha at this point, and the Buddha it's just the Buddha and Meghiya, probably doing alms, wandering around. And then Meghiya sees this beautiful mango grove, and he says to the Buddha, I want to go there and meditate. I've heard meditation is really wonderful, and this is such a perfect place. I'll just go over there by myself and meditate. But the Buddha says, oh, no, Meghiya, don't go. Wait until other monks come, other Sangha members come, and wait for them before you go off on your own. But Meggie insists, and I believe it's the typical 3 times, Meggie says, please let me go, please let me go, please, please, please let me go. And the Buddha finally capitulates and says, okay, well, go and sit in the mango grove and meditate. And then Meggie, when he does that, finds his mind filled with cruel, lustful, and confusing thoughts. And he's kind of surprised by that. And he goes back to the Buddha and he explains what he experienced in these meditation that he was doing. And then the Buddha replies to Meghiya, and I'm quoting here from the sutta. The Buddha says, where a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues, or one whose mindfulness is still immature, it is those admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues that is the first quality that brings mindfulness to its maturity. He says, in other words, you need help. You need friends. You need good companions to really cultivate maturity in your mindfulness. And then he goes on to say, and this is also true of moral conduct, of wholesome speech, good intentions, and realizing insight. This is not something you do on your own. And then, as I'm sure many of you are aware, later on in the Pali Canon, Ananda says to the Buddha one day, says to the Buddha, having good friends is really half the Buddhist path. And the Buddha says, oh, no, no, Ananda, don't say that. He says, having good friends isn't half of the holy life. Having good friends is the whole of the holy life. In other words, friendship is the most important element in the spiritual path. And everything else, I think, naturally flows from it. Now, I must say, when I first read that, I thought, eh, I don't think that's true. And yet, over the years of my practice, I have come to deeply appreciate more and more the truth of what this is saying to me. Most Buddhist traditions that I'm aware of really stress group practice in some way or another. That despite the fact we have times when we're very quiet, maybe even we're in solitude for a while, we do spend much time with each other, each other's company. And this has been the way since Shakyamuni Buddha. The Buddha didn't say, okay, now go off and meditate by yourself until you're enlightened, and then you're done with it. It was you wandered together with other monks, and then in the rainy season, you would come together and, of course, practice together as we do now in our practice periods. This is very important, I believe, right now. We need to cultivate this companionship with each other and then also with people outside to kind of demonstrate, show by the way we live our life that there is another way to be rather than us and them, divisive. So we may ask, is this spiritual companionship that we share, even though it's really rocky and difficult as it can be at times, is it really the whole spiritual life? Is it the complete spiritual life? I think it is. Even today, when we only see each other, perhaps in Zoom, it is still there, alive, vibrant, but we need to be aware of it. I think somehow being sensitive to it, being willing to reach out, to enact it, as Dogen often says, please study this thoroughly and bring it to life. Now, I'm not a fan of the word spiritual too much myself. Spiritual friendship has to me kind of a new age ring to my ears, and that's because of my kind of past experiences that I've had. But I like to use the word Dharma friendship, that we have a deep Dharma friendship with each other. A friendship that is based partly on coming together to hear Dharma talks, to meditate and to study, of course, maybe attend retreats, but particularly based on a common aspiration that we have, maybe even a deep conviction that we are not walking this path alone. We walk it together with others. It is true, of course, we each must walk, but we are not alone. There is people right beside us experiencing something similar to what we're experiencing. And I don't think I could do this practice without you, knowing that there are people deeply practicing, struggling with the tremendous forces that are in the world today, but still returning to the Bodhisattva vows, returning to the commitment of connection, of love, compassion. Because we all know, trying to live a life based on this Buddhist path is not easy. And the times when I have attempted to really kind of practice alone in my life, I have frequently fallen to the temptation to just give up the struggle. I mean, why bother when you can watch Netflix? Just give it up. And then there are times in my own practice where it feels like I'm just walking in a desert. I get up, I do my zazen, I'm doing, trying to follow the precepts, but it's dry. I think the Christians tradition I'm aware of calls it acedia. There's a time of deep dryness in our practice. And without others, um, it's so easy to lose confidence and disparage, one's own ability to practice and kind of give in to those desires that are kind of like yammering at us from outside. More comfort, more money, more this, more that. That will bring you ease. But when I meet others in Dharma friendship, it just reinforces my energy. It brings great nourishment uh, that is so wholesome. And at this time, so important. I imagine it sometimes like going on a long hike together with a group of people and you share the burdens. Like you don't have to carry everything. Some people will carry the tents and someone else carry the food and someone else, carrying the water. And it's great. You have great conversations as you're hiking along the trail. We share the load. We share the load. And that load also includes our suffering. We share that with each other as well. And Dharma friendship gives us the container to share it in a way that is not only wholesome, but healing, I believe as well. Over the years, in my teaching and my practice in general, there have been many people who I thought they've left the practice. Now they come for a year or two and then they wander away. And then suddenly they reappear. And they often say to me, Michael, even though I didn't practice, I remembered. And in some way, I really felt supported. I felt supported by knowing the practice was going on, that there was still a community there, even though I didn't come. Yeah. And of course, I don't mean to say, the Sangha and these Dharma friendships are easy. In fact, one teacher, I described the three jewels as the two jewels and the rock. And you can guess which one is the rock, right? Uh, the going gets tough sometimes in the Sangha because exactly the sort of person you want to avoid at all costs in ordinary life will, at some point, I can almost guarantee it, will appear in your Sangha. They'll be sitting right next to you or across the way, right? And there, suddenly, they, he, she, there is your irritating sibling, that childhood foe that you had that was always bullying you, or that self-centered ex-partner in some manifestation appears there. And there you are. You have to deal with that person. And you have to deal with your reaction to that person in ways that you would never have done so if you were simply left to your own devices, right? You would just avoid them or run away from them. But there they are, part of your Sangha. And you learn, I believe, hopefully, to see them as a whole person rather than, that irritating, ex or that nasty cousin of yours. You see them as a whole person. And maybe even in time they become a real, true Dharma friend. You support each other. So this support, I think, is kind of mysterious. It kind of goes beyond the obvious of like, oh, good, the good words that we hear, the understanding and sympathy of a warm heart. All of that, of course, is there. Um, but there's something more. There's something more mysterious. Norman once wrote something along the line of, he said, and he put it this way, which I really like. He said, there's a conversation going on in the Zendo that is beyond words. And every time we sit in with other people, we hear that conversation and they hear us. And I believe he's talking about those moments of encounter, true encounter, where the stories are dropped away and we meet that person. And we can do that because we sit. Because at least when we sit and face the wall in those moments, we're meeting ourselves. And from that, then when we have met ourselves and we let go of ourselves, we're able to really meet, I think, the other person. Somehow our edges become softer and we see them. I have read, and probably we all have read, we can communicate much more with our bodies rather than just our words. And I deeply believe that's true. And even in our sitting, our silent sitting, our upright, still sitting, I think we communicate more than we do with our words. And of course, with our bowing, our chanting, and the other things we do. Somehow the other no longer becomes quite so other, I guess. So I'll end in just a moment here. I just want to say, when I look back at my own life as a Dharma practitioner, I can see over and over again, I have been so deeply supported by the Sangha, both my own local Sangha, but also by you. To know that the Sangha is here. In many ways, we support each other, seen and unseen. And so deeply grateful for the Dharma friendships that I've cultivated over the years. 40 years or more of practice. I realize, I've never been alone. Well, I'm so grateful for that. Maybe I'll stop there. And Steve, I think you said questions or something.
Thank you so much, Shinmon Micheal. I'm grateful for a wonderful talk. We're going to sit for maybe 10 minutes together in Sangha, and then we have time for Q&A.